Welcome back, everybody. This week, I wanted to give a little bit of feedback as far as some of the questions I was getting as regarding the activities. More specifically, it's now time in the class that we start diving in a little bit more in depth into link types. Now, there are actually two terms that folks will often use regarding creating links to external documents, such as a CSS document, graphics, videos, and many other forms of media. The terms are absolute path and relative path. Now, you're probably familiar with an absolute path. For instance, if I go ahead and I go to www.google.com, this is an example of a very common absolute path. You want to think of absolute paths as giving full directions from point A to point B. And so that means what I'm doing is I'm telling my computer how to navigate directly out to the server where Google hosts its main search page. However, that is based off of a absolute path, and I'm also relying on the fact that that is the specific location where that file is stored. So if we think about this in terms of our own projects that we're working on that will be external to our the playground uh, area here up online. At some point, you're going to switch over here, and a lot of you already have, especially with our Project One, where we're working through and designing outside of the playground sandbox. So one of the things is okay, how do I actually set up my links? How do I prepare this information? You want to work in a relative path environment. The relative path environment, what that means is whenever I load a page and have some sort of link, it is going to go and look in relationship to my current location. So to this point in the class, our big main location that we start out with is our index.html document, which I have open over here in Atom. However, I decided to also add a couple of other files to get you started and get you thinking about relative pathing. So another thing that the Web Design Playground has done for you is with your cascading style sheet documents, by default, it will create the link and the hypertext reference for you. Where most of the time, I don't know if you've all noticed, if we take a harder look at hypertext reference, this is actually an example of a relative path. What this is saying is pretend you're standing on top of the index.html document. I would be able to point right over and say, I can see the my CSS cascading style sheet file. So therefore, that's all I need to put in here. So let's go ahead here and let's go one step further here. Let's actually make something that requires its own relative path. Now, I went out and downloaded an animal graphic here. So it's a little mouse and downloaded it from pixabay.com. Naming schemas are crucial whenever you're working with relative paths. So one of the things that I encourage students to do, especially if you utilize and make your own graphics, is keep the naming schema easy. So you can kind of see here, Pixabay likes to just generate random letters and numbers as far as the name goes. So what I'm going to do is right click and choose to rename. And let's just call this mouse. Now, two parts to a file name whenever you're working relatively. And you can see this in my CSS.css. You need both the name of the file and the file extension. So let's go ahead in our body here. Throw some HTML in here. Here is a picture of a mouse. And now I'm going to set the image source for my graphic. And what you can think about here is whenever you're setting this up, Think again like I just explained as far as the My CSS file is concerned. I'm standing on top of index. I can actually see and point directly to mouse.jpg. So if I come back over here and I say just mouse.jpg and I save, and let's go ahead here and preview, you can see how my picture pops up for me there because it is relative to the index document. So all I need is that file name. When you're starting out with linking, because our websites are going to be so small as far as folders and information, it's okay to just leave all of your files in the single folder here. But what I'd like to show you now is how you can break or mistakes that can be made as far as your website. And I saw this sometimes too as far as the activities for this past week. First thing is the name of the file itself. If you have a spelling error in the linked document's name in your HTML page, it won't find it. So let me demonstrate that for you. Like if I do mouse 1 over here, it's a little small on the preview there, but you'll get the small broken image link. That's because whenever the index page is looking relative to itself, there's no mouse1.jpg. Likewise, some folks were talking about on their CSS document. Like if I do H1 and I do color and let's say green, and let me go ahead and save that. When you are organizing your files, this also goes for things that are stored in the head tag and linked to in the head tag. If I add in like my CSS1, notice how I lost the coloring on the header tag. Again, that's because when the folder, inside the folder, when you're on the index page and you're looking around, there's no my CSS1 file. So spelling errors you want to be very, very careful of. Now here's another mistake that I'll often see folks do. However, it's fixable, but also it leads into more advanced web organization for your website. Oftentimes a website, you are going to have multiple pieces of media, especially images. So normally what folks will do is within the website folder, they'll make some sort of images folder and we'll move and store our files in there, especially images. So normally what I like to do is I'll go ahead and I'll just make an images folder. However, let me go ahead and refresh my page. You can see now that, whoops, I broke it. So what do I do? Well, now it gets a little bit more advanced here. I'm still standing on the index page, but now I have to sit there and say, well, you need to look inside the image folder to find the mouse JPEG. I have two options here. Number one, I could pull mouse JPEG out of the folder and just put it back in this base working folder. Or I could come in and using forward slashes to navigate, I could go ahead and set this up. There we go. Where using a forward slash, I can tell it to look inside a folder for a specific file. This is a very common practice in more advanced web design. So for example, another thing that we'll often do as far as advanced file design and folder structure is concerned, we haven't gotten there yet, but you can actually have multiple CSS documents attached to a single HTML document. So what you might see developers do is we'll make a folder and we'll just call it CSS. And then again, all of our CSS files are going to go into that folder. However, once again, if I decide to do that, and I'll save my CSS document and come back on over here. As far as my document goes, oops, it decided to actually resave it there for me, so let me go ahead and delete that. I'm going to lose that attachment there. The thing is I can fix this just like I did with the images. I have a folder named CSS, and you can see here now it fixed our header tag. Relative pathing is a common practice. It's not just HTML and CSS. You are going to see it if you work with other languages as well, be it Java, JavaScript, C++, C Sharp, C, Python, etc. These are all elements that we do as far as control. So to close this, as far as just giving you a little bit of background, number one, the reason whenever you're downloading the media files, as far as your practices, is the fact that the images, the audio, and the video are not stored locally. And that's okay. I am looking as far as the actual page source and looking at that whenever I'm grading. However, I wanted to give folks a little bit of background here as far as talking about the organization and why some of your links are breaking, because this is something as we continue through the course is going to become very important. So again, if you're just starting out, I'd encourage you, maybe don't worry about this folder portion yet. It is going to become something, if you do decide to go into full stack development or web development, that you are going to need to get comfortable with folder navigation and organization. However, for right now, it's absolutely fine that if you just want to keep everything in your main folder, so in my case, mine's CIT-125 week 5 demo, and ignore the need to actually use the folders in front of your links and your sources, that's also absolutely fine. So again, this was just your weekly update, some of the things I was seeing as I was grading, and hopefully it gives you a little bit more background as far as the relative paths are concerned.